Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and in today's episode, I will be discussing the entire Ghostbusters franchise, just on this same week when the latest, and possibly last, we'll see, Ghostbusters film, Frozen Empire, premieres, and debuted at number 1. And most of the rest of this episode will be a rundown of the entire Ghostbuster franchise up until this point, with my co-hosts, Ray and Nick. Ray especially is a huge fan of Ghostbusters, and I also grew up watching that original film many, many times, but honestly had not seen most of these films until this catch-up, specifically for this podcast. So all of these reactions are pretty fresh. So check out that conversation. I also include many bits of trivia about the production of the first Ghostbusters movie, mostly about that first movie, which is the most relevant one, obviously, which was all new trivia to me, and you may enjoy it as well. Some casting what-ifs, production issues, etc. As for Frozen Empire, I did watch it, and I'm going to give you a mini review here. I'm not going to spoil anything. And what I would basically say is, if you enjoyed the most recent Ghostbusters, the Afterlife film, which came out a couple years ago, which is really Ghostbusters mixed with Stranger Things, with a dab of Spielberg, which I guess is kind of redundant in and of itself. And I did modestly like that film, to be honest. I think you will probably like this film. I think there'll be a percentage of those people also that will not enjoy this film, which leans even more into nostalgia, brings in the cast a little bit earlier, but still mostly just glorified cameos for the cast, for the main cast, original cast. Other than Dan Aykroyd, who's very involved in the film, and to a lesser extent, Ernie Hudson as well. So more than they were used in Afterlife, but still not the headlining cast. Way too many characters, my main critique here. And I could nitpick this thing to shreds and really tell you all the bad things about it, but I kind of enjoyed it modestly as just a big effects comedy, very little comedy, by the way, but the comedy's pretty funny when it hits. So yeah, I would say if you hated Afterlife, I don't even know if you want to try to watch this, to be totally honest. If you were on board with Afterlife, we're very curious to see how it would extend from that point. You're probably going to like this. No guarantee of that either. All of this is your mileage may vary. All right, so that's my spoiler-free review. This is really a review-proof movie, to be honest, so you know what you're in for. If you like that, stick around, check it out. The effects work is excellent. The comedy, when it's there, is pretty funny, but not very much there, which is a big critique of Ray's, by the way. I modestly like this, but it's really like a 2.5 on my rankings, I'd say. So it's right down the middle as to whether, it's a coin flip as to whether you're going to like this or not, to be totally honest. Speaking of star ratings, I am dipping my toes into social media with Letterboxd. So if you're on Letterboxd and you'd like to check out my activity, look at the reviews, I'm just starting to post reviews there, but you'll see many, many more reviews and lists, including, for example, the recommendations I'll be making here on a podcast. I've had multiple listeners reach out and ask, is there any place where this is kind of aggregated? No, it has not been up until this point, but I do plan to create lists as I watch things and all these thoughts that come into my mind that, oh, this movie reminds me of this one, or this is a better version of this, kind of the commentary that I make here on the podcast. Just a place where I can organize all those thoughts, plan future episodes, and interact with you if you're interested. So follow me there. You can find me at Needs Intro, that's the handle, or Needs Some Introduction Podcast, which you can just search in that way, or click the link in the show notes. I'll include it there. And by the way, you do not have to be on Letterboxd to read the reviews and follow my activity. But if you do join Letterboxd, or if you already are on there, you can obviously comment and we can have conversations. So I'm not really into social media. I figure I'm going to dip my toes into social media that is film related, since that's my thing. But of course, you can always just email me at needsomeIntroduction@gmail.com. You should expect more content coming your way along this feed, by the way. Sona and I later today, we'll be recording a conversation where we discuss the Academy Award nominated film Anatomy of a Fall, which was possibly my favorite film of last year. A really, really interesting film, which is now available on Hulu for anybody who has it. So do watch that film. It's mostly in English, although it's a foreign film. It is mostly in English, so you don't have to read that many subtitles if you are averse to subtitles. And it's truly excellent. And then later this week, expect that conversation between Sona and myself regarding that very film, which you definitely can spoil. So do check it out ahead of time if you want to hear the spoilers in that conversation. Also, Celia, my sister, is joining me for a conversation discussing the original Roadhouse and the remake that just came out this week as well. Speaking of nostalgia, that's a conversation that will be popping up on your feed within the next week or so. And also do catch up on Shogun. Speaking of Hulu, speaking of subtitled content, a very, very subtitled series, mostly in Japanese, which nonetheless is finding an enormous audience and is very, very entertaining. If you like Game of Thrones, if you like these political intrigue shows, you very much will enjoy Shogun. Other things you could expect to hear me discussing here on the feed in the near future. I have been watching the absolute mess of a show called The Regime, starring Kate Winslet on HBO. And I think I'm going to stick it out because this show is just a head scratcher to me. I have no idea where it's headed. I'm pretty sure they are taking us somewhere. There's definitely a strong narrative hand here in the show. And either it's going somewhere and I don't know where it's going, which would be pretty exciting, or they don't know what they're doing at all. It could be a train wreck. So, but I'm in there for the rest of the show. It's only 6 episodes long, so do expect to hear my feedback once that series wraps up. But if you are watching it, and I know it has some decent sized following, expect that conversation coming in the near future. And with that all out of the way, let's start this franchise spanning conversation about the Ghostbusters films.
All right, Ray and Nick, we have so many things we should probably talk about because I want to get your impressions of, I feel like we've talked about this because we probably texted back and forth so many times with the end of Loki, for example, which is something we haven't talked about since then. And just the way these franchises, Star Wars and with a Marvel franchise, of course. And I do have some hope about the Marvel thing. Speaking of all these franchises and reboots and all these other brand extensions that become such a product in the past few years, mining the 80s and nostalgia for big IP reboots, we have the new Ghostbusters film coming out this week. And that's the reason I wanted to reach out to you guys. I know, Ray, you're a huge Ghostbusters fan. And my experience with Ghostbusters, I loved the first movie. I saw it in movie theaters. It was like a seminal year, 1984. It was like the first year we lived in the suburbs. I went to the movie theaters and we saw everything that came out that year. And we'll get into some of that like really iconic stuff that came out around that time. So for me, it was such an important film, but the rest of the franchise never really mattered to me that much. I did see Ghostbusters 2 in movie theaters, did not like it even back then, never revisited it, unlike the first Ghostbusters, which I saw, who knows, probably 3 or 4 times in movie theaters and then dozens of times on cable. And then, of course, we had Ghostbusters 2, which once again made no impression on me. If anything, it was pretty negative when I first saw it. And then basically did not see anything else other than the cartoons, which we can talk about for a minute. The original cartoon is something that I did used to watch after school. And I think it's actually maybe one of the most successful versions of this whole story. All that is to say that I had not seen the original Ghostbusters in, it's got to be maybe 20 years at this point. So I was really worried, go back and say, is this thing going to have aged really badly? And my opinion of the first Ghostbusters specifically, and we'll go through each one of these, because some of these I was just seeing for the very first time as well. I felt that like it really held up. Like some of the special effects aren't exactly on point. I have a lot of trivia for you guys to talk about how the production, which is really actually very interesting. The first time I did a deep dive on the production of the film. But I really thought that I'd say this is probably, when I was growing up, this was like a 10 out of 10 perfect film. But in retrospect, it's not. But this is like a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this. Even now, I think it holds up, except for some of the effects, except for maybe some of the comedy and some of the things that probably wouldn't pass muster today. We'll talk about what might not have aged very well. But in general, I really enjoyed going back to this.
I felt the same way that you did about this. And I really wanted to go back and relive my childhood. So I did go back and watch it again. And I agree 100% with you. I think it aged very well. It really held up. I agree with you that some of the effects a little wonky.
Yeah.
Some of the practical effects, but actually they remarkably hold up to today's standards even. And it is the quintessential perfect 80s movie. It's a combination of comedy. You've got special effects, sci-fi, and the parapsychology merging with the technology is just perfect, which I don't think they had any intent on this movie taking off the way that it did. No,
absolutely not. No, we'll get into that. No way.
No way. And I think this movie was made perfectly for Bill Murray. You get Bill Murray at his peak.
Yep.
He actually looks like he's enjoying being in the film.
Yes.
The other movies, even Groundhog Day, Scrooged, he doesn't have that like glimmer in his eye. He is excited to be in this movie. His excitement, his energy makes this movie. And I'm convinced without Bill Murray, we don't have the Ghostbusters that we have today, especially with the first.
I will 100% agree with that. I wasn't going to get into that particular detail until we talked about Ghostbusters 2, but I really did not like Ghostbusters 2 now, even more so than the first time around. No. And a huge differentiator is I felt every time Bill Murray speaks in Ghostbuster 1, I laughed, even now. Even little subtle things I had totally forgotten about, I laughed out loud. And Bill Murray in Ghostbusters 2, he does not even want to be there. It's every time he's on screen, it's the opposite of funny. It's excruciating.
Yep. And you got Ramis and Aykroyd. Again, Dan Aykroyd did not ruin this movie, which is a classic because many times Dan Aykroyd ruins movies. But they play the straight guys and he plays off of them. That allows Murray to go crazy and then have them be the sort of center of gravity.
Yep.
And it was like a perfect mix with it. And
their chemistry is fantastic.
I agree with you. Just if you go back and look at some of other Ivan Reitman's films, like Meatballs, for instance, it does not translate well to today's basically. Look, it's only 40 years, but it's not like it's the Stone Age or the Middle Ages here. But I mean, that first scene in Ghostbusters, he's totally perving on a very young Jennifer Ryan, I think, Runyon or whatever, the co-ed with the ESP cards. But you got to think back in the 80s, that's probably what college professors did. It was not necessarily a deviation from normal sort of behavior. And that gets a little, you look at it now and this age and you look back, he's a little bit of a perv here. Like, what's going on?
He definitely is. That's one of my age badly things is like how much of a creeper is he in this movie action.
He's a horny throughout most of the film, but then he even redeems himself. When
he does, yes.
Dana Barrett gets obsessed with Zool, and now she's the horn dog, and he's got,
his credit, they could have been very bad.
I don't think he's going to do anything without her consent ever, but you do get that sense that he matures during the film even. He becomes more of a good guy versus a bad guy for that respect.
So which is important. He has to change as a character. And Nick, I wanted to get your initial impressions. But before that, I do want to call out something very funny that you said, Ray, which is that you're like, it's only 40 years ago. Just to be clear about this, like when you're saying this movie came out 40 years ago, it literally is 40 years this year. At the time, in 1984, 40 years back from that point forward, like you think about like teenagers watching this right now, 40 years before Ghostbusters, it's like Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy or something, right? Like, so it's like 40 years ago. It's a pretty long time when you think about it.
I mean, that's the funny thing is like my kids will watch movies from the 80s and they're semi-lukewarm. So they don't hate them. They did like Ghostbusters, but it is funny because you remember like when we were teenagers in the 80s and my father's putting on movies from like 1940, 1950. What is this? Get this off. What is this? They used to play them on Channel 11, although I did like the Abbott and Costello. But
I did too, yeah.
To your question, I completely agree. The original Ghostbusters holds up actually pretty well. I didn't really, the special effects, I don't really look at them too closely, just knowing again was from the 80s, but definitely holds up well. You'd be hard pressed to find, I think, any Bill Murray, Ivan Reitman movie that doesn't hold up. I think from the 80s when Harold Ramis, any of those movies always hold up. I think Stripes, even though it's got definitely non-PC stuff, Stripes is one of the all-time greatest movies, so that holds up. Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters, absolutely holds up. Interesting thing, though, which might be one of the trivia questions you were alluding to, Peter Venkman, the original script that Dan Aykroyd wrote, Peter Venkman was going to be played by John Belushi.
Yep.
And then I think after his death, they modified the script to fit Bill Murray's personality as opposed to John Belushi. I completely agree with everything you both said in terms of Bill Murray's enjoyment. And I think that's what probably brought him back to Afterlife and now the new one that's coming out. And I also agree, Ghostbusters 2 is just, it's horrible. You want to like it, and it's just so bad. It was bad when I saw it back then. Yep. And in preparation for this podcast, I rewatched it. I will say there were some good moments in it, though, at the beginning before it really went off the rails. And I think they upped the level of jump scares.
Yeah, there's more horror in there for sure.
Yeah, like when Winston and Ray and Egon are in the subway tunnel, that was pretty scary. Yeah. with the heads that disappeared, and then they fall into I think Winston falls into the slime. So there were definitely some good moments in the second one, but just overall, it's pretty brutal film, and it just falls completely off the rails at the end. The whole Statue of Liberty thing, it was almost just, it was embarrassing back in the 80s when we were watching it. Now it's like, wow, as my kids would say, total cringe.
We want to have a little sidebar just on that, because there's so much to cover still in the first one before we get to it. But yeah, it's incredible, especially when you look at that year, and yet obviously it's 1989, but we got to talk about 1989 as a movie year, because that's like such an important year, just like 84 was such an important year for when this first movie came out. But wow, it's really bad. But I think what it comes down to is the incredible chemistry of the three guys primarily, but everybody. Like, I think Ernie Hudson's character, especially now looking at it, I think he's way underwritten, but he brings this real charisma to the character, and he's not I'm almost cringing when he shows up in this movie watching it now. Is he going to be the guy who's, these white people are crazy, which was like 90% of the black sidekicks at the time? And he's not that character at all, which I thought was really well done. And not only that, I think about like how underwritten like Annie Potts is now. Like she's so memorable, and I'm like, she's like in 3 scenes of this movie, but she really is like an important part of the movie. So all of them are like so charismatic, and the chemistry between all of them, the three guys, obviously. And like you said, Ray, I think it's like, it's all orbiting around Bill Murray's core energy, but they all play off each other so perfectly that it's like that chemistry is just incredible in that first film. And that's what doesn't, once again, I keep previewing the second one, we'll save it for then, but that's what just does not work in the second film for me at all.
Right. One thing that's interesting with Winston is they introduce him, and then you get a little window into the world building and the technology. Like when he first joins in, welcome to the and they got all the traps. And then they literally systematically show you how they load the trap, even though they're just teaching Winston, but they're really educating you on how the whole game.
There's always that audience surrogate. They bring him in at that point to show us how everything works.
And I wish there was some, I don't know if they ever did these, but just scenes like where they tested the proton packs, the PKE meter, something. I would love some of that extra stuff. And that's where you miss that in Ghostbusters, but Winston gives you that opportunity to see some of that. And as a lay person coming in to it, very much so, we'll talk about it. But in Ghostbusters 2, when Sigourney Weaver first goes to Egon and he has his parapsychology lab set up, like where you actually see these guys. Remember, they had a grant in Columbia, so they must have been doing something. They weren't doing it just to hook up with co-eds like Bill Murray was. So
that's what he was doing.
Like they always come in later where they were doing something. I love the fact that you saw his research and then he's like, let's take the puppy away. And he smiles and perfect. So it does give you that insight when you have the other people that are non-Ghostbusters. They get that little aspect. So it's nice.
And then even you had Dana, the interaction and between Dana and her neighbor.
Louis Tully.
Louis Tully.
Yeah. Rick Moranis, man.
Louis Tully. I was trying to remember his character's name. The whole Louis Tully thing is awesome too.
Yes.
Where he's having a party, come over to the party. It's awesome.
Vince Cawthor or whatever.
Vince Cawthor. The whole movie is it just works. Every scene, and it's a great movie when it's, I love this scene, and then they go to the next scene. There's no downtime in that movie at all. It's just one great scene after another. It's one of the best, as you said, one of the best 80s movies, and just a great comedy movie that it stands the test of time. It's a great flick.
It's just some of those lines that Hal Ramis, just Ted Band delivers, they're funny too. They get a chance to be just as funny as Murray in a different way.
Right.
Where you like that one where it's beyond rational thought when they're first looking at Stay Puft come down that alley on the street. And it's some of those lines are great. They really are,
Murray cracked me up. Like obviously there's the iconic dialogue, but the ones I laughed at the most at were like things that were like non-consequential. But I love when they're in the hotel and he like turns on the maid and they almost kill the maid. And she's like, what are you people doing? And he just casually says, sorry, we thought you were someone else.
Yeah. Actually, another good scene in the, if you rewatch it, which I'm sure you guys will, when they catch Slimer.
Yes, that's the one.
That's the ghost in the hotel.
Yeah.
It's the first ghost they ever catch. And after they catch him, after they've completely destroyed the ballroom and they're out there charging what the price is going to be, if you watch it again, look at Harold Ramis, he's like signaling to Bill Murray how much they should charge. And he puts up 4 items for 4,000 and then another finger for 5,000. So it's a great sort of little wink. If you look back at that scene, it's hilarious. Harold Ramis is like looking down and it's very Stripes. Like when their chemistry and Stripes, it's the same thing. And Bill Murray's 4,000. And then you see Harold Ramis like shaking his head, putting up 4 fingers. It's great. Great. There's a lot of little things like that when you look back at it that you probably missed when you were a kid.
All that stuff is so great though. Like I love when he gets limed and then when they capture him later on and he just casually walks in and goes, "That's the one that got me." And I'm like,
that's the one.
Which cracked me up. That's the one. Wasn't where you're expecting like dozens of other ones to be there?
Save some for me. Yeah, I got slime. You got slime. Save some for me.
Save some for me. Yeah, exactly. So much of this is improvised, by the way. Murray, of course, was improvising constantly.
Yeah.
Annie Potts' character, she came in and they basically cast her last minute. She walked in and the Reitman immediately threw her into the scene that they were currently shooting. She dressed herself from the actual people who were standing around, like the makeup girl. He took her glasses, put them on. So she basically just dressed herself in that moment, created the character on the fly, and that's it. And Sigourney Weaver, for example, the character when they cast her, she was a model, and she's the one who rewrote her character to be more of high-end, high society, which of course makes the whole thing, instead of being the hot model that Bill Murray's trying to get with, there's a little class thing going on there. So there's all these things that they're doing on the fly that are adding, basically their world building, like you said, in real time, and they're just bouncing off each other perfectly. It's pretty incredible. Speaking of Rick Moranis, who improvised all of his dialogue when he's in the party and he's talking about those tax deductions and this guy and what he does he improvised that whole entire thing. So they're just improvising in real time, and it's incredible what they came up with.
Oh, wow. You know that. That's great. It's like an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now again, you bring up Sigourney Weaver. Now, she is an absolute sex pot when you think about it. Between this show, you got Heartbreakers, where she's in Heartbreakers too, and even Galaxy Quest to some degree. And she is a great actress and she does a great job, but she really plays it up. And I agree with you, Victor, 100%. Not only is she becomes slutty once she gets possessed, but very sophisticated woman, very classy. It's a great role for her, really is. It's an excellent role. And again, was she just coming off Aliens when that was out, or was that?
Was it after?
Aliens was after. Yeah, Aliens comes after this. So
it's awful. It's awful close. I think it's awful close.
For Ray's point, she really is an incredible actress, because when I was a kid, for me, it was really hard to almost contemplate that it was the same actress. Ripley was the same person as Dana Barrett. I was actually blown away by that, because she's, not weak in Ghostbusters, but it's almost like, wow, Ridley's like a badass in Aliens, and then in Ghostbusters, she's worried about these ghosts, but meanwhile, in Aliens, she's a total badass. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, I actually couldn't comprehend that it was actually the same actress.
86 Aliens. So 2 years later, yeah. Still in our memory banks for sure.
Yep.
When that came out too.
I think that helped it to some extent. I don't know if it's ever documented anywhere, but I'm pretty sure that it helped getting Aliens off the ground, was that her profile was so much higher coming off of Ghostbusters, obviously. All right, so here's some of the trivia. So Dan Aykroyd starts writing this script in 1981. I don't know if you know about Aykroyd. He believes in aliens, and he's been on podcasts talking about all this kind of crazy stuff. Apparently, it runs in his family. His mom was a medium. His grandfather wrote this historical book about all the supposedly real ghosts in the world. So it's like it runs in his family, basically. So he's always been fixated with ghosts as well. So he'd written this script. It was for him and Belushi, like you mentioned, Ray. And also it was going to be Eddie Murphy's premiere, his first movie. Of course, the script got delayed, so it didn't end up happening that way. And it is supposed to be a throwback. He had grown up, speaking of Abbott and Costello, he grew up with all those like Bowery Boy, haunted house comedies of the 40s and the 50s, the Abbott and Costello's, the Bob Hope Ghost. What was that movie called? Catch That Ghost or whatever it was. So it was like those films from the 40s and 50s, which interestingly had gone out of style. And I was thinking, like, what happened to those movies? And then I realized, you know what happened? It turned into Scooby-Doo, because those movies weren't big in the 70s, but the Scooby-Doo, busting the ghosts every week had become its own formula. But it hadn't been in the movies for a while. And more importantly, they had not made a big special effects comedy like ever, because comedies, just like they do now, comedies don't gross as much as action movies or some of these other science fiction genres and stuff. So pretty risky to make a comedy that had this kind of budget at the time. And
I think it was the highest one, wasn't it? Wasn't the highest budget ever, I think, even to this day. Right?
It's crazy when you look at the budget for this thing. As a matter of fact, so I'll get to the budget part of it, actually. So they bring in Reitman to direct. This is when they reboot the whole idea of making this movie. It's just like a year has gone by since Belushi's passed. They're thinking about doing this again. And they decide to go forward with this, and they bring it to Reitman. And Reitman looks at the plot. By the way, this was not a haunted house movie. It was supposed to be these Ghostbusters travel through time, capturing ghosts. So Reitman looked at the script and said, this movie's going to cost $200 million. This is like in 1984 money. This is not going to happen. So he decided to be like, we need something a little more grounded. We could do it in New York. A lot of the cast was doing Saturday Night Live at the time, of course, in New York City. And he wanted to have something a little more basic and grounded. He brings in Harold Ramis, who has been his writing partner for Animal House and for Meatballs and for Caddyshack. So they've been working together on and off. So they bring him in, and basically they bring this package to Columbia. Columbia needs a movie for the summer. Columbia does not have a lot of confidence, but they want to work with these guys, right? Stripes is huge, and they want to say, hey, if you can get Bill Murray and you guys work together again, maybe we break even on this. But they're not that confident that this thing's going to really be a big hit. And Reitman actually is worried too. He has no idea how much it's going to cost. They ask him how much he needs. He says he needs between $25 and $30 million. And he said he had no idea. He'd never done special effects before. He took the budget of Stripes and he tripled it. And he goes, I guess that'll do. And then Columbia gives him the green light to start the movie, but it has to be ready by the summer. So they have 13 months to write the movie, cast the movie, produce it, edit it, market it, put it in theaters, and they have to make their date, which usually this is the beginning of a film that's total disaster. This is like whenever you hear about a movie that goes over budget and falls apart, this is like beginning of that story. In this case, it wasn't the case. But basically, they start to put this together, and they don't even have a script. So now Aykroyd and Ramis take his original script, and they stay at his house for 3 weeks in Martha's Vineyard, and they write the script in the house together, but on separate ends of the house. And every night, they hand each other their script, and they keep handing it to each other every single night and rewriting each other's scripts until after 3 weeks, they stop rewriting. They go like, okay, this is the final version of the script. That's how they came up with it. So now at least they have a script, and now they need to cast the movie. And they really need Bill Murray. But Bill Murray at the time was hesitant to do this. He didn't know if he was going to go through with it. So I have some casting what ifs that you might be interested in. Who could have been this cast?
Yeah. I know that Bill Murray was he took a hiatus after this movie too.
He did, yes.
Yeah. And
Did he really?
come back till he didn't come back till Scrooged, I think, after this. So he took like a 1 or 2 year hiatus easily after this. Yeah.
So the only reason Murray does this movie is because he had loved a book called The Razor's Edge, I think it's called. And it was a drama. And he only made this movie if they produced. The other movie came out like a couple of months before Ghostbusters. They actually shot the other movie. It was a total disaster. Critics hated it. And it was a financial disaster. And because of that, he felt so burned by, he basically the Ghostbusters, the movie he didn't want to make, turned into a huge hit. The film he thought he was going to become like his big dramatic breakthrough. It was a total financial disaster. And they basically made him not want to make movies for years. And honestly, after seeing Ghostbusters 2, I think he still didn't want to be making movies, even in 1989.
Did you actually watch The Razor's Edge?
I have never seen it. I've never seen it.
I watched it. I saw it. He was a Tibetan monk, and he
I've
gives
heard
up
about
his life. It's almost like the first scene in Batman Begins, Nolan's, because he does do the same thing. He just disappears to Tibet, almost like Bruce Wayne does, but he doesn't learn martial arts. He just becomes a somnolent.
That'd be pretty
monk.
Awesome. Let's re-edit it.
And then he does get reintroduced to society. And I just still remember the one scene where one of his friends is like the equivalent of a hedge fund guy nowadays. And he's got a ripping headache. I got this headache, a headache. And he just comes up to him and touches him in the temple. And he goes, what did you do? How did you make my headache go away? And it's It was that's the only scene I remember from the movie.
Was it a comedy or was it a
No, dead serious movie. Dead serious
God.
movie. It had elements of Castaway almost because he had just isolated himself for so long and then came back into society with this new ideas of a Tibetan monk. And it just, nah. The only reason I watched it because Murray was in it just to see. And my curiosity was instantly satisfied. Like, no.
Let me give you some casting what ifs. But before I get there, I wanted to tell you a couple of things more about the development of the script. When they originally wrote the script, the archetypes they had, and maybe you can see a little bit of this, for the three lead characters was the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion. So it was like, so that was the original archetypes they were working with, but they decided instead, because it was the 80s, obviously, to update these archetypes. So one was like the slick salesman, which of course is the Bill Murray character, like the used car salesman. The other one was like the enthusiastic nerd, like the whole idea of Dan Aykroyd character, the guy who's like way too into something, kind of a puppy dog. And then I have like kind of the intellectual nerd, which is, I think this is why the film resonated so much with teenage boys at the time, which I was, or preteen anyway. It's almost like high school stereotypes, only that these kids who would never hang out together in school are hanging out together, and which is basically the template for things like Stranger Things nowadays, which is obviously a callback direct. Okay, so here's some casting what ifs for you.
Definitely.
If Murray had decided to not do this because of the whole Razor's Edge situation and that whole negotiation, Michael Keaton, what do you guys think? Not bad, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Chevy Chase.
Ooh, different kind of comedy.
Very different energy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that would have played.
Tom Hanks.
At the time, not bad.
He's a year after Splash, right? This is like right
Yeah, you got Splash and you have, what is it, The Money Pit. He could have been pretty good.
Robin Williams.
Too much energy, maybe.
Always so much energy.
Yeah.
Steve Guttenberg.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, he was hot at the time.
Yeah,
that was Moon, all that stuff. He was always the.
He was about. What's funny? He hasn't broken out yet. He makes Cocoon in '85, I think. He's got '84 as the year of Police Academy, so he's
Police
just
Academy.
about. He had been in Diner though. Diner had been.
Yep.
He actually, that might have worked. That Steve Guttenberg might have worked.
He seemed like the fallback guy. He seemed like he had so many hit movies back then because it seemed like he was like the fifth guy on the call sheet every time. So it's like he just inherited a lot of those roles.
Yeah. Plus, if you think about it, though, he would, like Mahoney in Police Academy is Peter Venkmanish. So
Very
that's
much,
actually not a bad. That would not have actually been a bad casting decision.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
And the last one, and this is very different energy, but might have worked, but it'd been a very different movie, is Richard Pryor.
Oh wow. Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But interesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
Which is funny because he could have been the center of the movie, but the energy of the film would have been so different at that point.
well, what about if Eddie Murphy was the Venkman character? That too.
Yeah.
Think about that. That would have been interesting.
There is some casting what ifs there for that as well. But of course, the main thing was he moved on because while they were working on the script, he was in Trading Places, right, in '83.
Aykroyd.
So while they're working on this script, he's working with Aykroyd, hugely successful Trading Places. But I think at this point, he didn't want like the third or fourth most biggest role in this movie. And of course, he is currently shooting at the same, like in
Beverly Hills Cop,
Yeah.
which becomes an even bigger hit than Ghostbusters eventually. Here's the Egon casting what ifs. These are some interesting ones too. Christopher Walken. Imagine that.
Oh God. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like it. Yeah, and that wouldn't have been good.
John Lithgow.
Yeah. Maybe.
Christopher Lloyd, right before he does, of course, Back to the Future.
Yeah.
That would have been good. But yeah.
He would have been too crazy scientist though, probably almost, right?
Well, depends.
It depends how, like maybe a little bit less of a crazy Doc Brown, but that I could see that working. And he was like, Taxi was still going.
I think so.
That was done, right?
Just ended one or the
Just
other.
ended, yeah.
Jeff Goldblum,
That would have been good.
which I think could have worked. Yeah.
That would have worked. Yeah. He is similar. I could see him doing the deadpan lines like Ramis does. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And Keaton also auditioned for Egon.
Huh.
Which is funny about, what's funny about Keaton in that it could be either way because Keaton can play like Stone, like that, the straight man basically, but he can also be way over the top if he wants to. So I was like,
interesting. Cool. Very cool.
That is cool.
oh, and by the way,
usually,
I mentioned,
what I was going to say is usually Ramis doesn't act. He's just the director or the writer on all these things.
Right.
So it's rare where he gets in the movies.
But when he's in, it's so deadpan. between this and Stripes, oh my goodness.
Reitman wanted him in the role. Yeah, like he didn't actually want to be on screen, like you mentioned. And Reitman, having worked with him previously, he goes, "No, you are perfectly for this. So you have to just have to stop and get on front of the camera."
He always plays the straight and narrow character to Murray's crazy character, and that's it. Just that works. That stick works, like in Stripes.
And then, like I mentioned, Ernie Hudson ends up in the role meant for Murphy, although Ernie Hudson's spoken about this already, that the role was significantly reduced, which makes sense. You already had 3 guys on there. To be honest, a lot of these, they really don't need a 4th lead, to be honest with you. But of course, if Murphy had been in there, they would have pumped that. He would have been like a co-lead, obviously. Speaking of how casting changes things, by the way. So of course, Eddie Murphy leaves this because he gets the opportunity to star in his own movie, which is Beverly Hills Cop. First time he gets to lead on his own. So it's a big opportunity for him. Replacing Sylvester Stallone. So talk about how recasting a movie can change a movie completely. Think about Beverly Hills Cop with Sylvester Stallone. What a different film that would be.
I can pretty much guarantee there wouldn't be 2 additional and now a 3rd additional movie.
Oh, exactly. Yes, that would have been, that franchise would not have survived. And that first film would not have been anywhere near as popular.
Yeah. Although the 3rd Beverly Hills Cop should be, that one's even worse than Ghostbusters 2. That's almost Caddyshack 2 level.
I'm very curious to see what they could do with the new one, though.
Yeah, the new one
I'm just shocked.
Excited about.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll get to that.
They have John Astin. John Astin's going to be in it. They're bringing back, we'll see. I don't want to take this off. Well, of course.
I do believe they're bringing back Walter Peck, too.
Oh, in Ghostbusters, they are. Yeah. Peck's back, yeah.
Guys, we haven't even talked about Atherton and all. He was the 80s. Yeah. He was the quintessential 80s douchebag, whether it's Die Hard or Real Genius, where he's the professor in Real Genius. He was great. He was the person that everyone hated whenever he's in one of those roles. So they got to bring him back.
Too. You don't really, he disappeared after Die Hard 2. I don't even know what he's been in since then.
He's very busy, but not in anything big. Like I literally looked him up after this because I was just like, man, it's like I had forgotten. I knew he was in the movie, but I hadn't thought about the fact that, man, between this and Die Hard, like how massively, and Ray, exactly the same thing. I'm like, this is guy like the 80s douchebag. I mean, the definition of a douchebag.
He was classic in Real Genius. He was
yes,
great.
Real Genius.
So good in Real Genius, yeah.
Such an evil character in it. It was great. That scene at the end with him and Deborah Foreman, awesome. So, but I think he is in the new one. That's what I saw.
Yes, he is.
He is in the new one. Yeah. They've been tight-lipped as to. I'm guessing that Sigourney Weaver will show up in this movie. She was in the end credits of Afterlife. I'm guessing she'll in some way, shape, or form be in this movie. Although they've been tight-lipped, I don't think Harold Ramis will be in it though because he's retired. But you never know. They may throw a couple of surprises. Maybe we get a cameo.
So who didn't do this? You're looking through the credits and they're rolling, and you see Sigourney Weaver as Dana Barrett, and you're saying to yourself, "Wait a minute, I don't really remember." Oh, boom! It's right there.
Exactly. There she is. Oh, wait a second. There she is.
That was like the craziest shoehorn cameo, just to get it in right there. Because
they brought her in. Like I was about to say, brought her in. They didn't even bring her in. They went to wherever she was, and they had Murray sit there, and they shot for an hour, and that's her cameo in the film.
And they bring that nostalgic ESP zapper just from the original film, right down to the same cards too. But
of course,
that was actually I don't know, spoilers ahead. That was one of my biggest laughs of the entire Afterlife was that credit roll scene where Sigourney Weaver, and I'm like, where is Sigourney? Oh, there she is.
There she is.
Oh, there you go. So still got the comedy aspect to it, at least that part.
So a little more trivia for you. They started shooting in New York City the week of Halloween in 1983, appropriate enough so they could get some of that background stuff. They stole a lot of the shots. So like when you see him being chased through Rockefeller Center, those are real security guards chasing them down the street. That whole sequence is so iconic in a movie where you have that scene where the music's playing and the gang's all together and everything else. It's like that is the image you imagine with the daily news and all the newspaper headlines popping up. At the time, it's really interesting when you think about it. I've just been reading a lot of stuff about New York in the 70s and 80s, and you think about how every representation of New York City was, whether it's like Taxi Driver or Mean Streets or you name it, let's take from New York. Any representation of New York is that New York is a pit and a hellhole, and obviously had gotten bankrupt and had all its financial problems and everything else. And they really were like, we want to show our version of New York, right? So they really wanted to rehabilitate it to some extent. But at the same time, they were like, are you sure you want to shoot in New York? It's dangerous. It's this, that, and the other thing. So they did shoot in New York. However, I was surprised to realize this. They only shot in New York for like a few weeks. At the time, there really was no kind of production facilities on the East Coast. Everything was shot in California. So they actually shot in New York for a few weeks. Then they took a break. Then they shot the rest of the movie in California. Everything inside the firehouse they found one firehouse around Los Angeles that is in that style. That traditional New York style firehouse really doesn't exist on the West Coast. So they found the one that matched, and they basically shot everything around either on sets or around locations that were near enough to the sets so that they could conveniently shoot whenever they wanted to, as opposed to New York, which really couldn't do that. But they did shoot in the public library, by the way, and they had to shoot everything so quickly because they had a limited budget and they had limited time. So they actually only shot the sequence in the public library 3 times. They had to like literally pick up all the cards and re-stack them all and then blow them all over the place and shoot that. Everything was shot like that. Sometimes 2 or 3 times, that was it. And the only way that Reitman even knew that he had the shots he needed was he had somebody running a black and white camera shooting 16 millimeter right alongside the regular camera. And they would develop the film every single day. And he would literally edit it at night afterwards and then basically say, what scenes are we missing? And then they would be ready to reshoot anything they were missing the next day. Or if there was some improvisation and they needed to connect 2 scenes, they would shoot it the next day because they're like, we have no time to do this. We only have 1 shot at this. And this is good sometimes. Under limitations, you work better.
Yeah, you do. That's it. The stress brings out the best in you sometimes. So that makes sense.
Slimer cost $300,000 and was called the Onion Head Ghost. It didn't get the name Slimer until the cartoon, actually. And they called it the Onion Head Ghost because it smelled like rotting onions, apparently. So no one liked having it around on set, but they spent a fortune on
Really?
it.
Wow.
Yeah. And they did all the effects were practical, like you mentioned, that everything was shot like they're all puppets. The special effects team that did this, you could probably tell it from the style, was also the same special effects team that did Raiders of the Lost Ark and Poltergeist, and has a lot of the same kind of effect styling as that. But they had no computer animation. This is all like claymation and stuff. So they would take 3 weeks for 1 second of special effects footage. It's like they were working until the very, very last second. They were like really tight schedule. So then they show a rough cut to some random people. They pull them off the street. And Reitman says that the audience likes it. The effects aren't finished yet. Audience laughs in all the right places. He's really worried that the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is not going to work. They get it. They laugh at it. They jump at the scary parts. They laugh at the funny parts. So he's like, good. We don't have to reshoot any significant part. We can make it on budget. Meanwhile, at Columbia, they show it to a bunch of insiders. Nobody laughs. Everybody's like, what the hell is this crap? They're ready to lose their shirts on this. Coca-Cola, who had just bought Columbia, literally had internal memos to this day about like, we're going to lose so much money on this movie. And they're ready to like basically lose it completely. Interestingly, this is very bizarre. And I remember this back in the summer. They released the movie on the exact same weekend as Gremlins, which both movies turned into a huge phenomena, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I find it really weird that you put this out the same weekend as you couldn't space these things out. Like you have 2 movies that are horror comedies that are probably geared towards younger men across the board. And you open them on the same weekend. It's like you couldn't put them 2 weeks apart at least. Like it's a very strange choice, right? But that's how it went. And of course, it opened almost with the exact same amount of money as Gremlins, but legged out and ended up becoming the most successful comedy of all times until Beverly Hills Cop beat it just 6 months later. Still a huge phenomena. Bill Murray got paid points on the back end, and they estimate that he made about $30 million just for himself. And that's in 1984 money. So that's some pretty serious money.
Wow. Jeez. He was smart. Yes. Very smart. Definitely.
And one last piece of trivia before we move on to the next one is you may notice that Ghostbusters sounds a lot like I Want a New Drug. Yes. Huey Lewis in the News. And it turns out during that scene, the walking down the street montage, while they were editing, they put I Want a New Drug on as the temp score. And then they had a bunch of people come in and basically come up with an alternate version of the song. They asked Huey Lewis to write a new song for them, but he was already busy working on Back to the Future, so he couldn't commit himself to another movie. So they just ripped it off and they basically wrote the exact same song with different lyrics for Ghostbusters. It turns into a huge hit, but Huey Lewis does sue them, and he has a writing credit on.
There you go. But that was the whole scene with Casey Kasem, right? Where they're doing the top 40 or whatever. Yeah, that little montage scene. That's interesting. I did not know that either.
I didn't know
It's so funny that it sounds the same. And then I was reading the trivia and they're like, that literally was the temp track. I'm like, no wonder they sound the same. They just wrote a new song over the old one.
Sorry, boys. You're just too loud.
Wow. That's now that you say that, it's like, I can't believe I never realized that. It seems.
Yeah, it's exactly the same song.
What is it? You got 8 chords or something. If you go past that, it's like a copyright infringement or whatever. Is that it? 8 chords?
Oh, now they're suing people for just like reminding you of another song, which is ridiculous. But that's a straight up ripoff. When you really listen to those 2 songs back to back, that's just a straight up ripoff.
Yeah. Yes.
But hey, everybody got rich off of it. So, hey.
That's it. Even Huey Lewis got his part.
Yeah, that's right. Just pay Huey Lewis. That's probably not his biggest hit because of he's got some other pretty big ones, but all tied into Back to the Future. But I'm sure every Halloween when Ghostbusters gets streamed everywhere, making money.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Talking about comedy horror, Ghostbusters, the original, really, unless you're like 10 years old, it's not really a horror film at all. It's just there's not really a horror aspect to it. Like you mentioned, Nick. I think Ghostbusters 2 is a much more darker movie in that sense.
Yeah,
definitely.
In my opinion, the scariest scene in Ghostbusters is the scene in the public library when the library that scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. That was the scariest scene I think in the entire movie. Really, even when Gozer shows up at the end, it's not really that scary. Ghostbusters 2 had many more jump scares to it, and it was much darker film. Even that scene when the guy's name Godish, whatever, takes the baby, comes out of the sky with the baby carriage. That's dark.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true. Definitely. Yeah.
Putting a baby in danger in general, although they try to dampen it as much.
Sorry.
Can we just skip over Ghostbusters 2?
I don't have much to say about it, but do have to at least mention it. But before we move on to that, what has aged the worst in Ghostbusters? These are some of the things I noticed. Was it getting a ghost BJ? Is Dan Aykroyd getting a ghost BJ the thing that's aged the worst?
Right. Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Which I think was in the music video as well. Now in retrospect, I'm not sure if that was appropriate for the kids to be watching that in the afternoon.
That's true. Yeah, that might be it, I think. Or just, again, his overall demeanor, just hitting on those college girls as the professor.
Exactly.
The inappropriate relationship there, I would say. But other than that, no, it's still pretty good.
Some of the, when like at the party, like whenever you see the dog, the claymation dogs, I guess they are, and it's not in, when you see the actual puppets, when there's somebody inside the dog puppet, it actually looks pretty decent. But every time you see it like running down the hallway or whatever, it looks really bad, like really bad.
But that's almost like a throwback to like, was it Harryhausen?
Harryhausen, yeah, exactly.
Claymation, like Sinbad movies or Clash of the Titans almost. Like, there's almost an element of classic, like pulp. Wow, that's cool looking.
But why, can I ask a question? Why does it look so bad now? Is it because obviously the CGI, the stuff we've got today, we're accustomed to it and it's better, but why didn't it look bad to us back then? Is it because the standards have changed so much that
I think the things are higher, and I think the other part of it too is it's just too high resolution. I haven't seen this yet, but I've heard The Abyss, by the way, is just available for the first time in 4K, and I haven't seen it. I wanted to see it in movie theaters because they released it a little bit back in Christmas time to promote the 4K coming out. And I haven't seen this, but people say that it looks incredible, but that, first of all, that they've made a decision to clean up the print to make it look digital. So you got rid of the film grain, which is one thing that might make it look a little too clean. But worse than that is that the effects were all done like at standard definition. And now you're looking at the original special effect is in standard definition and everything else is in 4K. So it's just, that looks really rough, disparity there. So like a lot of these conversions, like when you see everything in Ghostbusters, the print looks pretty clean. Like I couldn't see any film grain or anything on the version I saw anyway. So it's probably like all 4K. And then you have this claymation blob running across the screen. We're used to seeing this on VHS primarily at 420 lines of resolution versus thousands of lines of resolution now. Like it's too much resolution.
And that's what I was getting at. Not that obviously our standards are much higher now because of CGI. Not not stating the obvious, I was getting to that. In other words, is there something from a video standpoint that it's making it stand out as so bad now? And I think that's the answer, is that the resolution is so high. We're seeing this in such higher resolution that these special effects are exposed to being so awful. Because it's almost, when you see those claymation dogs running, it's almost as bad as like when you're seeing like a sci-fi movie from the 60s. That's like the ants, the big, what was it, those ants look horrendous, but it's, wow, now these dogs look just as bad as those did. And I'm like, man, we're watching this in the 80s. I don't remember it looking that bad, but that's why. It's because the resolution is just gotten so much better that we're seeing these movies in resolutions that we, originally weren't intended to.
Yeah. It's not even, you don't even have to go that far back to see some of this. I just started rewatching there they are on VHS. There you go. Exactly. See, Ray, by the way, for anybody who's listening. So Ray just went and got his 2 VHS Ghostbusters 2, which is probably the best way to watch those movies at this point, if you have a VHS player. Speaking of what you were just saying, Nick, with the resolution, I was saying that just watching Lord of the Rings again, that some of the special effects now just blown up to high definition don't quite hold up. Like, you really see the separation of the actors versus the backgrounds. So some of that is like, once again, too much resolution. But I definitely think about that with horror movies, right? There are horror movies that when I saw as a kid that scared the crap out of me, and on their little VHS or like on a little television, and now blown up, and you see how cheesy the special effects look and everything else. Like, it's not scary anymore. Unless it's practical, by the way. I think that's why people like practical so much. I just watched The Thing, John Carpenter's Thing, recently. And it looks incredible. Like, it still looks incredible because it was all actually shot. So you blow that up, it still looks incredible.
Same with Jurassic Park. All the Ray Winston dinosaurs, the practical dinosaurs look
They're
amazing.
mostly puppets. Yeah, people don't realize that the reason the effects are so good is that there's, I forget what it is, but there's only dozens of effects shots in there and everything else is practical. So it's just the things that kind of transition from one to the other. And that's why it still looks incredible to this day.
Dennis Murin also, that's another guy that does the practical stuff. It's a lost art. I don't think you could even resurrect it nowadays. Who would you have to call those guys probably to get a practical effect the way it is now? And the cost would be prohibitive anyway.
He was all practical.
But the cost would be prohibitive anyway, probably at this point.
All right. We got to talk about Ghostbusters 2, at least for a little bit.
Oh, man.
Okay, so it comes out. It's 5 years later. My first notes on Ghostbusters 2 were, what is going on here? That's my first quote, because I was like, the opening, I totally forgot this. The opening scene of Ghostbusters 2 is Dana, and she puts the baby in the cart, and she's having a conversation with her doorman, and the baby goes rolling around New York City, and then that's it. And then we get the Ghostbusters 2 splash, and I'm like, this is how you decided to open the Ghostbusters 2? Like,
it did. The carriage did roll over some mood slime, so you have the impression. But unless you watch it again and again, you miss that whole.
It serves no purpose.
Wow, definitely.
And then, of course, I remember seeing this in the theater. I didn't remember the whole opening scene. This is where we open with baby stroller rolling around New York. I didn't remember that. However, what I did remember was how literally you could feel it when you're in a movie theater. You could just feel like the energy just brushing down everybody was when the Ghostbusters show up and they are doing kids parties because they're total losers. I got to tell you, as far as, not that you should always go for fan service, but you're waiting 5 years. This is one of your favorite movies of all times. And this is where you start the movie off. Literally, you could feel the energy sucking out of the movie theater. Like, we were all like, oh no.
Yes, I remember a similar, and I'm not going to take us on that tangent. I won't, I promise, but what you're describing is what happened when I went to see Phantom Menace.
Star Trek 5.
Phantom Menace had that same feeling.
I know.
Everybody's like, what the hell are we watching here? But yes, Ghostbusters 2.
I saw Phantom Menace. I'm not going to digress that much, but I saw Phantom Menace at a preview screening. And I was just like you said, everybody was, this is great. And after 10 minutes, everybody's, oh my God, no, it's not. It's terrible.
I saw the Phantom Menace. So I won't send us off on this, but I saw the Phantom Menace at the Beekman in Manhattan. The night it opened, I was there at midnight. And I remember 10 minutes in, everybody literally was like, what the hell is going on here? And it was similar, going back now, exactly what you just described with regard to Ghostbusters 2. Same sort of feeling. We were all psyched. It had been 5 years. You get in there, and again, it's this concept of, I don't know what it is, but just destroying these characters that had been built up to these heroic characters, and you've turned them into complete losers and jokes. Beckman's, he's on TV as a
the psychic, the world of the psychic or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, here's a little contrarian hot take on that. Okay.
Sure.
I actually enjoyed this part of Ghostbusters 2. And I'll tell you why. Because there's that element of the suspension of disbelief. And it almost was the same angle as The Incredibles, where they had to hang it up because too much liability, too much property damage. And it's this makes sense. This is like putting Ghostbusters in a reality kind of matrix now. So I dug it, actually. I liked where they started on that. I really did. So that's my hot take on that part. I actually enjoyed how they started the development in the beginning of the movie anyway.
And I want to be, to your point, Ray, I actually do like I like that whole kind of counter narrative that you like, for example, The Incredibles do a great job of that. But what I was describing was like the experience of like
energy.
The fans not wanting to hear that. But what I would say is I could see in a way that what they're trying to do there, except for the fact that I'm watching this movie and we're like 2/3 of the way through it. And finally, like in the courtroom, the brothers get released or whatever else. But this happens like pretty deep into the movie. And I'm like, if they have some kind of resurrection, or, they're actually working behind the scenes with this is actually borrowed from like the all-female Ghostbusters, where they know something's going on, but then knife you in the back into the public because they're trying to keep the story under wraps. If you did something like that, but the idea that they just are just schlubs that everybody doesn't like, and it takes a really long time for anything to happen in this movie. Like nothing happens for more than half the movie. And I'm just like, oh my God. And by the way, so they're just going to coast on Bill Murray being an adorable babysitter. And that doesn't work either. So I'm like, wow, this is rough. They literally don't know what to do. They bring back the entire cast. Everybody gets bigger roles, all the side characters, and they have no idea what to do with them. It's pretty horrible.
It was horrible. It was horrible. No, it was horrible. It really was.
Mood slime. Mood slime. I did like the Scory brothers scene though in the courtroom was like, that was probably the highlight of the movie.
The effects are a lot better there for sure. That kind of shows off that the effects have gotten much better.
Where they're in the electric chair and they break out of the electric chairs. And although being a lawyer, I do have to say that there is no death penalty in New York unless it's a murder one. So that was wrong. But however,
that was back in the day though. That's back in the day.
That was back in the day. But that was really my favorite part of the movie, was that whole Square Brothers thing. And then it just, as you said earlier, it just completely fell off the rails.
That whole
Statue of Liberty thing. Honestly, when I watched it again, and I just watched it again in preparation for this, I was actually just looking at the actors to just see if they were embarrassed by the sheer.
Were they ashamed of themselves?
Like it was just, how could they even want to be associated with this? It's horrible.
Awful.
Yeah.
I'll never watch that. I will never watch that movie again.
Absolutely. And the funniest thing about it, this is another note. I'm just looking at my own notes. There's like literally nothing in this film that was above average, other than maybe some of the effects here and there. But the film felt cheap, by the way. Even though the effects are better here and there, this is a really expensive movie. The original Ghostbusters, they made between $25 and $30 million, which wasn't that much more expensive, by the way, than Return of the Jedi. So it was pretty expensive. This one cost over $40 million. And some of that
it cost that much to make the toaster dance on the pool table. I can't imagine $40 million. Jeez, yeah.
And it looks cheap, and it's not. And worse than that is just like I said, like hardly anything happens in the plot. And then even though I really don't like anything I'm watching, I guess I'm getting enough of a vibe of just getting these guys back together that I was leaning. I'll give this like a 3-star, right? And I had forgotten how bad the ending was. We get to the last 20 minutes of this movie, and it is excruciating. I'm like, that knocked it down to 2 stars immediately. I'm just like, this is awful. We have a face off with a painting. Like and the Statue of Liberty, the big payoff is the Statue of Liberty marching down the street.
It was just really bad.
Ray was so upset he stormed off.
I think he went to go find some more Ghostbusters.
He's got more paraphernalia to bring back.
Yeah.
So the other note I put down here, which was that I think that there is this kind of revisionist history that this movie wasn't as disliked as it was, but this comes out in 1989, the year that Batman comes out. This is the year that Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade comes out. This is Lethal Weapon 2 comes out. Honey, I Shrunk the Kid comes out, speaking of Rick Moranis. And anyway, you can always tell how much people actually like a movie by looking at what's the multiplier, what's the first weekend versus the final box office. And so Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade comes out and has the biggest opening weekend of all times. And it goes on to make almost 7 times as much money as its opening.
Yeah, but that, again, not going off on a tangent, but Indiana Jones 3 is as good, if not better, than the first one.
I still prefer the first one, but it's right up there. It's a true classic. I love that movie. And very watchable, obviously. And then later in the summer, you have Batman comes out, has at that point, the biggest opening weekend of all times. It makes over 6 times its opening weekend. Lethal Weapon 2 comes out later in the summer, makes 7.5 times its opening weekend. Honey, I Shrunk the Kid makes 9 times its opening weekend. That's how much.
Wow.
And in the middle of all that, Ghostbusters 2 comes out. At the time when it opens, has the biggest opening weekend of all times. And it makes 3.5 times more or less its opening weekend, which is like half of what all these other movies, or more, worse than half of what all these other movies were, because people did not like this. And understandably so.
So 89 also for, I have the baseball enthusiasts out there. Victor knows I was a baseball podcaster. 89 is a big movie for baseball, a big year for baseball movies.
Major League, yep.
Field of Dreams that year.
Yeah.
2 big ones. And Christmas Vacation was also 1989, although Christmas Vacation picked up more popularity, Die Hard, as the years went on and people saw it on video and then DVD and now streaming. But whenever somebody mentions 1989, I always think in movies in 1989, I always think Batman, you mentioned, Major League, Field of Dreams, and then Roadhouse, of course, which
Roadhouse. We got to talk Roadhouse because Roadhouse is, man.
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah. There's a remake is coming out this week.
Oh God, there's a remake coming out?
Yeah.
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Starring Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah. Who got totally jacked for the role. And directed by Doug Liman, by the way, the guy who made the first 2 Bourne movies and Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise. He's
Great
definitely,
movie.
you got a talented director. The reviews are in already and they're mixed. I got to tell you, in preparation for that, I just saw Roadhouse for the very first time just last night. And wow, that is, I got mixed. I got opinions about that too. Man.
Don't get me started on Roadhouse. Roadhouse is in my opinion, Ray was talking about perfect 80s movies. Roadhouse is the quintessential perfect 80s movie. There's nothing, that is the greatest movie in the 1980s. Ben Gazzara, come on. It is unbelievably great.
No,
Sam Elliott, there's nothing better than that.
Okay.
Roadhouse is one of the greatest movies ever.
Talking about movies.
I'll just leave it at, if you had not seen it until this point in your life, you might have a different opinion. That's all I'll say.
Oh my God.
Come on, a bear fell on me at the end. The last line, a bear fell on me.
God.
It's a great movie.
That blonde, I just still have fantasies about her when I was a teenage boy.
Yeah. The funny thing is I occasionally remember the scene when Ben Gazzara is driving and he's got the car and he's going between both lanes and he's doing like the zigzag.
Just cruising along to the music.
I do that every so often. If there's no one on the road, I'll do the Ben Gazzara move.
Live out your Ben Gazzara fantasies.
No, it's that movie was, I love Roadhouse. I just can't imagine remaking it. I'm actually somewhere along the line. I remember they were doing the remake and then I completely forgot about it. And up until this second, when you mentioned it, I had completely forgotten that they were doing a remake. And wow, it's coming out next week.
You can watch it on this Thursday. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. So
Okay. No, I have to check it out.
I'll definitely check it out and give you you can listen into my later this week when I give you my review of my original impressions of Roadhouse.
If it wasn't for Roadhouse, you wouldn't have the Kelly Lynch resurgence in Charlie's Angels there.
That's right.
So,
Oh, really?
yeah. It's her, man. In the original Charlie's Angels, the original movie, the one with Drew Barrymore,
Yeah.
Lucy Liu. Yeah, that's Kelly Lynch. That's from the Roadhouse. The same girl.
What? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right, let's move forward to, we got more than two more movies to cover. 2 more. And of course, there was so much outrage on the internet when the Ghostbusters, the all-female cast, Melissa McCarthy movie came out 2016, I guess it was.
Yes.
And I didn't see it. I mean, like I had like my experience of like, I loved Ghostbusters 1, did not like Ghostbusters 2 at all, had not seen Ghostbusters 1 even in quite some time, and didn't really feel a need to run out and see Ghostbusters. And the outrage didn't help sell it to me either. Anyway, so this is my first time watching it. And my thoughts on this were, first of all, hey, for basically adjusted for inflation, it's the same size budget as it was back in 1989. I thought the effects work were incredible in the movie. Actually, was very impressed. It looked great. The cinematographer is Paul Feige's, Feige is, what's his name? But the director here, he's also worked, like he did Bridesmaids with Melissa McCarthy. Also did Spy, by the way, which is great. Spy is hilarious. If you've never seen Spy, you got to see it. It's so funny. And anyway, his cinematographer, standard cinematographer, but also does all of Wes Anderson's movies. So anyway, the movie looked fantastic. Special effects looked great. I actually enjoyed most of this. I thought the humor among the cast members didn't always work. It depended on who's bouncing off who. They were trying too hard to make me laugh. Once the plot starts moving, I actually enjoyed it a little bit more. Chris Helmsworth's having a lot of fun. I thought the action sequence at the end was pretty strong. I thought the villain was pretty cool. Like this idea that he's like harnessing these ghosts. It's not that ghosts are invading. It's like he's trying to harness them to get revenge on the New York that's ignored him all this time. So I like most of this. I think it's completely unnecessary, but I was surprised. Like I was expecting this thing to be like the worst thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I'm like, for this type of big budget special effects comedy, kind of what you get. And it's better than some.
I look, if you did not have the original Ghostbusters franchise at all, and this was a standalone movie, it came out in 2016 with those women actresses who are all comedians, I agree with you 100%. I did not think it was that terrible. I didn't. And if you also look at it at the angle of, yes, it's a reboot, but it's just an alternate universe. It's not the same universe even. So this is
well, it has to be, right? Because you have the cast members show up and they like kill off. I mean, that is the biggest mistake. I think the biggest mistake in this whole entire movie is, to your point, Ray, I think make this movie about ghost busting girls that has nothing to do with Ghostbusters, right? And don't spend, like, the special effects actually were really well done, I think. Don't spend $150 million on it. Spend like $50 million on it. Like, so it doesn't have to be a huge blockbuster, right? And then, hey, if you want to make like a side Ghostbusters tangent, you could even say, hey, didn't something like this happen in New York? And then you could even have them show up at the end, which is basically what they end up doing with Afterlife, by the way. It's like they could do that. And then you say, oh, look, this is in the same universe, right? I think that by basically saying this is Ghostbusters and then having the Ghostbusters come in, but not play their original roles, I'm like, what was that decision? That's just bizarre.
Well, just as an alternate reality. So they could have easily brought in the paranormal, the ghosts, and had literally like a cross-dimensional scene at the end where they all did come in as the original Ghostbusters from whatever, Earth Prime or Prime Ghostbusters Earth versus this Earth, and it just explained it away.
Imagine they were the first ones to do the multiverse. That'd be hilarious.
Yes, like a multiverse thing. And I think if they had just done that, most of the crowd reaction would have been tempered and they would have understood that this was not intended to be a sequel and it was just its own universe, be it as a standalone movie. But they didn't do that. So that's where everyone was just like, what's going on here? I swear that's what the original public reaction was, because they just had the wrong idea what this movie was going into it. It's like anything else. You go in with expectations a certain way, and then when they don't meet your expectations, whether it's a Marvel movie or whatever, you either get really annoyed or you get really disappointed. There doesn't seem to be any.
There's no in between.
Unless there's Endgame. Endgame was probably the best. So
I agree with both of you. I actually enjoyed there was no other movie to compare it to. Standing on its own, it was actually an enjoyable movie. I liked Kate McKinnon, she was hilarious. I liked Melissa McCarthy. Hemsworth was hilarious. Kevin, the whole Kevin, the concept was awesome. I thought that was hilarious. So I enjoyed the movie. I thought the special effects were really good. And the story was pretty solid too. So it wasn't a bad movie. It was just like, did it really need to be made? And I think the way I view it, and I guess, in terms of where it exists, it's in an alternate universe, but I actually think it actually would have been a better movie if it existed within the Ghostbusters universe, but it was in a different city, so to speak, or different somehow rewrite it in a way in which it's existing in the same universe, because that was the issue. There was no continuity, and it was just complete and utter reboot. And the way you have to review it is it's just in a completely different universe. So it's a movie that didn't have to be made, but on its own, I thought it was actually a pretty solid movie. I thought it was funny. It was certainly funnier than Ghostbusters 2. I would watch that.
Much fun. Yes. I would definitely watch this before I'd watch Ghostbusters 2.
I would watch this movie again for sure. And there's some really, honestly, there's some really funny scenes when they're interviewing Kevin for the job. And he's on, when they're like, Melissa McCarthy asks him, she's like, where are the glasses? He's like, I realized it was becoming a pain to clean them, so I just took them out. Like the lenses and just like the whole thing. And then my cat, can I bring my cat? And they're like, oh, where's your cat? My cat's a dog. And they're like, what? And he's like, the name of my dog is Mike Hat.
Mike Hat.
It was like it was just silly, but it was funny. It was good. I thought it was a good movie. I actually enjoyed it. Again, it's a movie that probably didn't need to be made, but on its own, it's a solid movie and quite funny. I would put it actually, if you had to rank them, definitely it's ahead of Ghostbusters 2.
Absolutely.
No
Absolutely.
If there's somebody that's enjoying being in the movie like Murray was in Ghostbusters 1, Hemsworth is definitely enjoying his role in that movie. He just loves the fact that he's playing basically a ditzy blonde male now instead of a female. And it's certainly empowering for women and stuff. And they love how turning the tides on us in that regard. So that was even funny in itself of who it is even, It's just
a couple of things I think are so funny, though, in retrospect, that, I once again care less about this cultural conversation at the moment, but I did review it a little bit just for this. And first of all, and I do think it's a miscalculation that they erase the original cast rather than making this like an addendum, like something like this happened before. And then that's all they needed to do to preserve the original lineage. But I think the two huge things I think are a mistake here. One is by having the cast come back and then in these alternate characters, it erases the original mythology, which of course is what people got offended by. But I think the other part of it is that there was this conversation that these women are like taking away the original Ghostbusters, which in a way they did. But what's so funny about it is the production company is Ghost Corps, and Ghost Corps is the four guys. It's Ramus's, who had died at this point. So it's his son, and the rest of the cast members, but they all have 25%. Like they all four unanimously, can't be a majority, unanimously have to green light whatever gets. So they signed off on this. Like they're literally signing off on all of this. Like they didn't say, oh, you got to, carve out our original mythology, whatever else. They're like, sure, have a dragon throw me out the window and kill me like 2 minutes after I show up on screen. Like this is what they're signing off on. So I'm like, don't blame the creators of the movie for doing this to them. They were the ones who okayed the entire project. And the second thing is broader. I think this goes to all IP, by the way. It's like why I think a lot of the Marvel films have been failing as well. It's seeing the scale of this movie. No wonder this movie failed. Why would they spend so much money on this movie? If you wanted to build up to have a massive film like this, make it like the second or third movie if the first one is successful. But like, where would they go from here? Is this going to be as big as an Avengers movie? If this had been successful, the next movie would have cost $300 million. It's like, where are you going? This is Ghostbusters. Like, chill out, calm down with this $150 million budget. Like, it's unnecessary to say the least.
Right. But I think.
I always felt that the cameos that they had in that movie, and the sense I got was it was almost them putting their stamp of approval on for the benefit of the people that were so critical of that movie that was being made, and everybody knew it was the women Ghostbusters and blah, blah, blah. I feel like they inserted those cameos in there to give, I don't want to say lip service to the fans of the original Ghostbusters, but to almost make it seem like we're putting our stamp of approval on it. And the fact that, yes, it's our production company, but we're also even going to be in the movie to show that we're in support of this. So you shouldn't be overly critical of this movie. So that's the sense I got. It was almost like fan/lip service to the fans to put them in there because, well, Aykroyd was the cab driver.
Yep.
Ernie Hudson was the uncle to Leslie Jones, who gave her the hearse. And then I forget what Annie Potts' character was.
She shows up.
Sigourney Weaver shows up. She's like
she's in the credits too. That's like her thing.
Yeah.
Just shows up in the credits.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Sony and the Ghost Corps, that whole project to build the whole franchise, I think they learned from their mistakes from 2016
Yes.
with Afterlife. They realized what the fans do want,
Right.
and it was not the 2016 version. So
Right.
I think they did realize that if they are going to make this a new cash cow or whatever you want to call it, Sony, you look at Sony, they've got the Spider-Man that they hang on to for dear life, and they'll keep producing stuff to keep it.
Oh my God, I just saw Madam Web. Ooh.
But it's the same with the Ghostbusters. They don't have they have very limited franchise where they could try to build on this on movie after movie. And I think Afterlife would have to seem like a huge success compared to the 2016 film.
Yeah,
sure.
And you know what? It actually, this is what, going back to the original point of like how they got their entire budget on that first movie rather than splitting things up. The reason this one gets a sequel is because it made almost the same money as the previous one. They really grossed the same amount, but they spent half as much. So guess what? You spend half as much, you make money on the same exact amount of money. Speaking of, let's just transition to that part of it too. I liked Afterlife too. Like, once again, didn't love it. And I think, Ray, you have probably stronger feelings about it than I do. I actually enjoyed this. I thought most of the action sequences were pretty good. Most of the comedy worked for me. I liked the kids. They didn't find them annoying. I liked them they went for nostalgia, but if anything, they went for like a Spielberg type feel and leaned into the mythology a lot more. But most of this work, you know what? I got a little choked up at the end, I got to say. You're bringing back Ghost Egon, but most of it worked for me, I got to say. Do I want to see a sequel? Not really, but I didn't mind watching it. That's basically what I came down.
Before I let Ray go into it, because I think Ray's got strong feelings, like you said, I liked it. I would have liked, my issues with it were, I would have liked more comedy. I would have liked it
definitely, yes.
Closer to the original Ghostbusters, more comedy. A Paul Rudd in there, so you could have really,
could we have any comedy would be more appropriate.
That's a good point. That's a pretty good point.
Again, you guys, Victor probably gets nuts when I do this, but this movie also violated my Star Wars rule where you've got the original cast. Let's get them more involved in the movie and don't shove them in the last 10 minutes. Like, everybody wanted to see the original cast. So I think you probably should have brought them in to the movie sooner, not just Dan Aykroyd. And then you don't see Winston, you don't see Venkman till the very, very end. And I think that, and you don't see Dana Barrett until the credits. So I think if you're going to bring them back, they should have probably had the original cast in a little bit earlier. Before we go to Ray, I do feel I'm excited about the movie that's coming out because you are going to have now the original cast. You're going to get what you want. And I'm really hoping they bring Ghostbusters back to New York. It's in New York City. You got the original cast now with the new cast, which I like the new cast. I like Paul Rudd, and the kids were good. They got the kids from Stranger Things and the granddaughter. So I think I'm looking forward to the new movie. I think it's going to be great, but but they better do some work. There better be more comedy. It's got to go back to the first movie where it was more of a comedy than took itself so seriously.
Yeah. This one, way more. The tone really shifted that way.
Obviously, the Ghostbusters franchise doesn't like Ghostbusters 2 either, because if you look at Afterlife, where was the Ghostbuster 2 references, if there were any, other than Raise a Cult, the store, and I think I saw the toaster at one scene. Other than that, I don't think there was any Ghostbuster 2 references whatsoever. It's almost like they decided it didn't exist, right down to have the original Ecto-1. Where's Ecto-1A? What did they repaint the car again and then put it in mothballs? It was amazing how they just skirted over Ghostbusters 2, and with going with the same plot line with Gozer as the antagonist. I agree with you 100%. I think the Ramis send-off was incredibly emotional. I thought it was done very well. That's the way to do a CGI character who's posthumously. I thought it was great. If you know the background between him and Murray and the battles and the feuds that went on right after Groundhog Day, it's even more emotional when you see that scene, because they didn't have a chance to do it together in person, but it really, I think that really rescued the movie. That scene rescued this movie, because other than, again, I love the callbacks. I love the nostalgia, but Nick, like you said, where was the comedy? There just was not. It was like, I felt like I was watching an episode of Stranger Things. Like, it was
very much. Yes.
Way more drama. Look, I enjoyed all the callbacks. They were great. They got a chuckle every time. Many times I felt they were shoehorned in just to do it, just to get it, whether it's a Nestle's Crunch Bar in his jumpsuit or a Twinkie in the glove compartment. But like even the book stacking, they stack the books in his house, right? But it's, wait a minute, they're having an earthquake every day. How do those books stay stacked? There's the writing on this was atrocious. I'm sorry. They need to tighten this up with this Frozen Empire. They went from Egon's granddaughter watching a laptop with the original Ghostbusters commercial, trying to learn about her grandfather, to the next day, they already have a proton pack and they're fighting a ghost. I'm like, where was all this? How? You got to explain this a little bit better. You got to make it tighter. I get it. It's a fun movie. You go to the movies to escape. It's a form of escapism, but at the same time, you've got to have some world building. You got to, it's just like, where did they get it? And I get it. The other kids fixing the car up, but I don't know. That's what really lost me. And then again, I'm going to bring up Star Wars now because
here we go.
Ghostbusters Afterlife, right, was the equivalent of Star Wars 2 Force Awakens, because mid-movie, we've got the same movie now. A same movie, right down to some of the same setups and the same scenes. And I'm just like, okay, I get it. I know they're going for that nostalgia, but let's have a real story, a different story here. And it's the same story. I was shocked that that was Olivia Wilde as Gozer. I thought that was,
I didn't even notice that.
There was no depth to any of these characters other than probably Egon's granddaughter is the only one that I have any sense of an emotional attachment to. As far as the Stranger Things kid, he could go work in the belt and the food place wherever he wants, and his pseudo girlfriend or friend or whatever. I don't know. I just didn't feel it till the end. And the end, I don't know. At the end brought it back up, but they got to do a better job this next movie.
Like I said, they needed to have the original cast and more in the movie as opposed to just the end. It was like, that's the big payoff. I get it, but you wanted to see that. And that's the thing that I always am super critical of, among other things, with Star Wars. You bring the original cast back. How do you not put them all together?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. How do you wait until the last 10 minutes to get Ray, Egon? I know Egon's done, but you get all four of them back together, not till the very, very end. And the other thing, to Ray's point, the whole J.K. Simmons, he was Shandor or whatever, the guy that built the
Seymour Shandor,
right. He built the building in New York, right? In the first one,
correct.
He dies, and he's in about 30 seconds goes or kills him. I don't get that. I was like, what just happened there?
That's the other thing. Was he really alive? Was he a zombie? Was he a ghost also? Like, I couldn't understand that either.
Yeah, that was weird.
They don't explain that. I think there's probably more there that they probably cut out because obviously you don't get him in there if you don't explain it more. But yeah, I think they just probably try to tighten up the runtime basically.
I did like the continuity of he was mining selenium where they made the girders out of selenium and his own building in Manhattan. I get all that. If he already had a duplicate temple of Zool right there in the mining colony. Anyway,
why do you need the building in New York?
Why is the building in New York at all? Why are you exporting all this all the way out there? And I think that was another thing. It's in the country, which is just a different environment for Ghostbusters. You really need New York City. And I think hopefully the end scene where you see Winston bring Ecto-1 back, it's okay. Now we know. And obviously you see the trailer. Frozen Empire is going to be in New York City where the Ghostbusters need to be and should be. That's it. Bottom line. I thought even did the Egon Spengler character disjust with how just disheveled I guess he had become and such a recluse and all that. It's again, the same thing. It's trashed my version and opinion of Egon, even though you do see how he was trying to protect the world and all. But at the same time, they just pull the character through mud in a lot of ways. I don't know why they had to do that. I just don't understand that. And is there any reference to Egon having a daughter in the original Ghostbusters?
Right.
I cannot find it whatsoever. And who was it? It's not Janine, because obviously Janine's like the I don't know if she was the real estate agent or just had something to do with maybe his last will and testament. I'm not sure, but maybe she had power of attorney, like that one little scene, and she has a sly grin looking over at Carrie Coons. Oh, that's Egon's daughter. But like,
maybe we find out this movie that it's her daughter. I don't know because
she looked at family pictures, so it's as if she knew the mom, and I don't think it was Annie Potts.
No,
yeah. But by the way, that's my pet peeve of that whole thing is that Janine shows up to be like, here he was a tough guy to get along with, blah 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 blah, that whole situation, right? And then within a day or two, it's oh my god, everything that happened in New York is happening again, and Janine does not decide to be like, let me tell you what's going on right now, okay? Like she doesn't decide to come back. She's just like, I dropped off the keys. My work is done here.
Yeah, exactly.
Like she can't be that far away. She knows something's going on if the earth is opening up every day back in the homestead.
I just didn't understand, like you said, Nick, why they had to make it so convoluted and so distant and obtuse until the very end. It just, I don't know.
It was like you were watching a movie that, again, I didn't mind. I liked it. It's just, I had issues with it. And it's like you were watching for an hour and a half to just get that 10-minute payoff.
Right.
So it's an hour and 40-minute movie, an hour and a half just to get to see the 4 original Ghostbusters together. And you could have just done that an hour earlier, maybe set it up for 45 minutes and then somehow get it back to New York with the 4 of them, or the 3 of them, and then the ghost of Egon, or somehow I would have done it that way. In some way, shape, or form, somehow the granddaughter has to get to New York to warn Dan Aykroyd. They could have done it like that, and it would have just been much, much better. Again, not horrible, because there were moments in it that we had a lot of throwbacks, and then of course the end was a good payoff, but it's a little bit frustrating to watch knowing that you've got the cast and you're wasting time getting them together. And I'm hopeful.
I don't think the cast wanted to be in the movie, right? That's once again I think that they are more on board with this most recent version now that
he left the baton, so to speak. But yeah, they'll be in the movie now. It looks, based on the poster, Paul Rudd is the lead.
Yep, definitely.
If you see the poster, he's really the lead of the movie, which I like Paul Rudd. So
we brought up practical effects. Okay, the practical effects in Afterlife, like for instance, the 2 dogs, the terror dogs.
Yeah,
in Afterlife, look far worse than the practical effects in the original Ghostbusters. I just unbelievable. They looked atrocious in that Walmart. I'm like, what? I could have made that in my basement, for crying out.
Did you? They didn't look great. Anything really unless you spend a fortune on it. If you don't, anything that's shot in like bright light is usually going to look weaker.
Well,
but I don't know. Like it's still better than that first Ghostbusters movie, but it is 40 years later. So
again, you always want to have characters in movies, and you want to understand their motives and what drives them to do these things in scenes. For instance, you take the analog scene where they're chasing a muncher, who I guess is like Slimer, and then in the Afterlife, same comic relief ghost, and Main Street, which is the analog to the ballroom scene, right? Again, there's this element of, we've just been haphazardly thrown into this Ghostbuster thing. But why? Why do they have to chase this ghost? They have no reason to chase this ghost. In fact, if it was real life, they probably wouldn't. So like, why all of a sudden are they endangering their lives, destroying property just to chase a ghost? What are they going to do with it when they catch it?
No, that's a good point, right? Because
what are they doing?
The whole setup in the original Ghostbusters is there are these 3 professors who lost their grant, so they need to figure out a way to make money, and they become Ghostbusters, and that's why they get Slimer. That's the motivation here. I agree with you. That's actually a good point. Think of that. It's just just let the damn thing go. Who cares?
Because that's what their granddad, what her granddad did.
No, I worked in the private sector. They expect results. So that's why they were doing it in the original. Come on, man. So it's just, I don't know. Those are the things that lose me in movies, when it's just, you start really questioning the motivation of characters, or is the character there to just have an exposition of this, or is there a real reason that they're doing these things? And I just never quite got that feeling at all. So I don't know. We'll see.
To be honest with you, you were making me like the movie less, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, don't worry about it. It's not that important to me.
Look,
But I was going to say that I forgave a lot of those type of things, which are absolutely accurate, because to me it's like a throwback in some ways, in the same way that Stranger Things is a throwback to, honestly, a lot of those, not necessarily Spielberg movies from the 80s, but like Spielberg adjacent movies from the 80s, where, the kids suddenly are the heroes of the movie for whatever reason, right? And it is pretty arbitrary whether they are the last Starfighter or the kids in Gremlins or whatever, where it's like, they suddenly save the city and they're like, because they do. So I think I saw it from that framework and forgave it for that, its own form of nostalgia.
It's great for escapism. It's great to have a good time. It's just, if you're a hardcore Ghostbuster fan, and again, maybe you like the technology aspect of the Ghostbuster stuff, again, you got to show some backstory on this. Where was the power? Where were they getting the power to charge all these things? They did mention he did run away with the remaining plutonium or whatever.
Right.
I guess that's one of the reasons they power the proton packs. But I don't know. It just fell a little short to me, and luckily at the end it redeemed itself. So we'll see. I just think just how old some of these characters look. Murray just looks so old.
So old,
And it really just puts it in perspective for you, even. Like we said, 40 years ago. So it's a long time. It's a long time to expect miracles and expect the continuity to last. But hey, here we are. So
they did go. That's what the craziest thing about it, when you think about the all-female cast, that was, what is it, almost 30 years later? And that they could not get their crap together to make another movie for all those years and then they only gave a green light, by the way, because they had lost one of the cast members. Well, if we're ever going to do this, we got to do it soon. But they took one, and now you've lost, and just passed away too, right? 2022, right?
So his
now you got
son has taken over.
It is pretty crazy to think about, like that this franchise was dormant for so many years until the female Ghostbuster movie came out, and which odd.
But
a bad movie will do that. Look at Beverly Hills Cop.
I think Ghostbusters 2 did this. Ghostbusters 2 was a knife to the heart. That was it.
Beverly killed that until now, and now you've got it this summer. That's going straight to Netflix, I think. Right?
That's a Netflix thing, exactly.
Yeah.
If you look at it from a marketing perspective, and the original Ghostbusters never was intended for that, but that movie is made for marketing, whether it's the figures, the proton packs, the scenes, like the firehouse, the car, like it's unbelievable what more they probably could have done even with that if they wanted to. Because I don't really remember a big merchandising push after Ghostbusters, right? Now there's some stuff out, but when we were kids, no, they didn't do that stuff. Meanwhile, Star Wars is still doing it. There you go with your.
I'm looking at all my Funko Pops.
There you go, man.
We got the Stay Puft Marshmallow made right here.
That's one of the most interesting things you just said there, Ray, is that in my research was that the Ghostbusters franchise is, from a marketing perspective, it's a multi-billion-dollar marketing. And you compare that to Star Wars or Marvel, which is like tens of billions of dollars, right? But when you consider, like you said, that you're really working, the iconography is all coming off that first film pretty much. And nothing else has really resonated with the fan base. So just this kind of thumbnail sketch, but I think it's impressive the amount of world building they make in that first film that they've built up this universe, like you said. And the vast majority of the money they've made is not from the other movies. The vast majority of that money is coming from all of the iconography from that first film. And it's just like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and like you said, the Ghostbuster mobile and we just lost Nick, by the way.
Yeah.
What a bed.
Yeah.
But it's so just like all of that stuff comes from that first film, and it still generates money to this day.
Yep. Absolutely.
And the video games, but that's all the same.
That's true. If you look at that 2009 video game, I had that for Xbox and I loved it. I thought it was great. In a lot of ways for me, that was Ghostbusters 3 because it did tell a tale. There was intertwining aspects of Gozer and that story with Shandor in it too. And if you went through the whole campaign, you got a full movie out of it. And it was pretty cool. And you were the quote rookie trying to earn your spot on the team, but it really did tell a nice story at and I think they reissued it later on, like maybe 2016, they remastered it a little bit more I don't think they ever did it for PC platform, but they definitely did it for Xbox One. And it was a great video game. Even that. I mean, that you can actually hunt a ghost, and the controls were pretty cool. Actually get a proton pack, and the dynamics of it were great. And it was a lot of fun. It was a really fun video game. And look, I think Sony's looking at this as a possible future brand to continue to milk, and we'll see how they do. They've got a chance here with this next movie, but I don't know. I hope.
How do you feel about that? Yeah, how much confidence do you have?
I think it'll at least be as good as Afterlife, probably better, because Nick had alluded to, I think some of those main characters seem to be in it a little bit more, but you can't go by trailers. You don't know. Maybe you're just looking at a couple cameos and that's it.
Right.
So we'll see.
Yeah. I do worry when I think about how the cast has been so reluctant to put in hours on these other films.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, this could be their last shot at glory here. So hopefully
Paul Rudd's a great character in the sense of he can carry movies now. He's done that. He's not just a peripheral guy. He's proved that with Ant-Man. I mean, look at Ant-Man in the Marvel Universe. Who would have thought that Ant-Man would have been so popular in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe? So he does do a good job. So I think he's going to do a lot of heavy lifting in this film. That's what I think. That's what's going to come down to.
All right. So let's check it out, and then we can touch base again and see how that goes. And hey, while we're at it, why don't we watch that Roadhouse movie and talk about that? Because I got a lot of, I am, pretty fascinated by Roadhouse, one of those blind spots for me. So I'm just like, okay, finally caught up on that. And I'm like, oh boy.
Roadhouse, if it's on cable, that's one of those movies like Armageddon's another one. If you catch it, you've got to just watch it now. You can't click it. If you see Roadhouse and you click onto it, that's it. You got to watch it now. So I don't know how many times I've seen the original Roadhouse. So that's a good one. Yeah, definitely like Armageddon. That's another one. Die Hard's another. These movies, some of these movies just have great replay ability and replay potential. The original Ghostbusters has high replay potential.
Yeah.
2, no. 2016, no. Afterlife, no either. Roadhouse, definitely replay value. So we'll see if Jake Gyllenhaal can represent as good as Patrick Swayze. So we'll see.
Conor McGregor's in it too.
Yes. You think he's his friend or you think he's the antagonist?
Oh no, I think from what I've seen, they're definitely not friends.
Oh, so he's the antagonist guy, huh? All right. We'll see. We shall see, man. All right.
All right. Good talking. Thanks.